we're the ones we're the wanderers between worlds, right? And we somehow found each other. But it's interesting because the finding of each other seems to be contributing to like a deeper sense of wandering, right? We're like we're wondering together, right? There's a sense of
wondering and wander. Those two words kind of sound the same, right? Yeah,
totally. And we're peers, right? It's like there's a sense of like peers. Like there's to be a peer is to peer, to stand together and peer, right? Peer deeply. And there's a way where I feel more peerful when I get done with these conversations. My ability to peer into things and to wonder and to attend to things. So the we for me is I have all these kind of people on some level that I walk around with in my head. Like, so these conversations open up a door, and it's not just like I'm actually thinking about the person and having a dialogue with them. It's more like the dialogue is in the question marks that these conversations bring up, that my thought, my feelings, and my observations and my tracking of things attract, right?
Yeah.
And I wonder and have these open questions that I sit with and ponder about that have all been, that's the we, all the people that have contributed to that, I think my whole life, but it just in a very concentrated way lately in this last year.
There's an intensification of this process that you're talking about, I think.
Yeah.
And also in my life, it feels like it's taking over so I could look at myself in two ways. I could look at my job and the things I do and the things I do for money or, whatever things I do just to survive in this world, which is not always, simple. Right. And then this kind of passion and this interest, and all this stuff and all these people, which is taking over that. Like, and I want those two. I want it to take over completely in some sense. I want the whole thing to just take over my life. Right.
Right. You want to be fully possessed, not partially.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I like that.
Possession is just can be completely, swallowed up by meaning instead of wandering around in a zombie-like state doing things that are not fully valuable or
totally. And you've just relatively recently moved to Paris, right?
No, I've been here for ages now, actually.
Oh, you have? Okay.
I just recently moved outside of Paris. I'm kind of on the edge of Paris. I'm in Avon, France, which is next to Fontainebleau, which is I don't know. Do you know Gurdjieff?
Oh yeah.
It's right next to his grave. I moved down here because I wanted to be next to Gurdjieff's grave. I mean, that's the romantic reason.
You're right. That's awesome. I Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff is like it. He may be. The more I understand Gurdjieff, he may be probably one of my heroes, I think. Yeah,
me too. We have that in common as well, I guess.
Yeah, I know. He's influenced a lot of. Well, it's arguable, but you could say he's the first inkling of the East to the West, or mysticism into like
exactly.
Idea like a mystic could be somebody who's not a mystic, but somebody who's a walker of this world too. I think he was the first person to even conceptualize it like that.
Yeah, like the fourth way seems to be like that's what everybody's reaching towards on some level. Gurdjieff's fourth way, I think.
And so, in many ways, he was the first one to bring language for this to gather. So I would imagine I can kind of almost feel like, as we're talking about, I can kind of feel his hand right underneath, and kind of made that possible. I mean, I read some of the stuff that he's and what people have said about him. For one, it's like, depending on who's describing him, it's a different Gurdjieff, which is fascinating.
Right.
And some of the stuff, I'm like, God, this is really kind of out there and strange at a content level, but like, just this notion of that a person who works and is in the world can actually transcend in meaningful ways. If that wasn't even a consideration before, like, it seems like he was a part of the category, right, that allowed us to think we could or couldn't, right? Mm-hmm. So I just kind of feel it's funny, I haven't thought about him a long time, but like I can kind of feel his hand underneath all of this.
Yeah. No, I think.
And there you are. You moved right next to him.
Yeah, so I had to be next to him.
You're the one.
I had to be.
Right. You're the one, right?
I'm not a Gurdjieffian practitioner or anything like that, but also it's a very beautiful place, and it's on the edge of Paris. So it allows me to access to Paris without having to live in the big city, right? And there's a big forest all around, which is nice for a family.
Right. Totally. In the family. And I heard you, I want to hear a little bit about your family. And like, I heard you say in one of your conversations, something about, this is the most adult I've ever been.
Yeah. Well, I think I didn't even grow up till I was about 40. I think I just spent my early life fooling around.
Oh yeah.
I was interested in two things: fooling around and spiritual practice. Probably those two things. But I never. It took me a long time to settle. So well, I've been in a good relationship for some time right now. So that's not that true anymore. But that's true in my early life. What's that?
What makes it good?
Well. What is the phrase you used in one of your conversations with Jordan? I think it was secure attachment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's good. You know? And that's novel. Again, that's like something I wouldn't think that could happen to somebody like me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and, I would imagine. It's funny because you talked about being a walker of between worlds and us wanderer, and I can't help but think of Hermes, right? Like Hermes is, Hermes is this kind of unique god, hermeneutics, like the kind of god of language, which is this in between world, right? So Hermes is between, like, is not completely a god and not completely a human, but this between worlds, but like its home is the place where they paradoxically come together. So language, right? So it's on one level, it's like language is very paradoxical, obviously, because it's like the word isn't the thing that it describes, yet it makes the thing available, and it couldn't be without it. That whole homelessness kind of thing. And I think it was Hillman pointed this out. I think it was Hillman, where he talked about, it's interesting, he talked about that Hermes, I think mythically, is wedded to Hestia, or one of the goddesses that is the goddess of domesticity, right? Mm-hmm. And he talked about, like, in his clinical practice, where how if Hermes goes manic and divorces his wife, you end up with these kind of puer, like, boys, or Icarus going, flying too close to the sun and then falling, right?
Yeah.
But when Hermes is in right relationship, right? It's interesting how this homelessness, right? Is wedded to domesticity. And so when you said
that rings true, that rings very true. In terms of my life. It also made me think of the Buddhist teacher Chogyam Trungpa. He talks about, if you become a Buddhist, you take refuge in being homeless. So there's this sort of this sort of paradox is like, okay, you're not going to be attached to some place, but at the same time, you're making a commitment to something.
Yeah. Yes. Say that again. So that kind of hit me. Being refuge to, how did you put that?
Well, you take refuge is like a traditional Buddhist thing, right? You take refuge and you take refuge in being homeless, right? And not being attached to, there's different levels of it, not attached to a place, but also not attached to an identity or not attached to something. At the same time, it's a strong commitment. So I guess that's when I thought of the domesticity, and the let's say the wildness meeting and creating something that's kind of alive. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, I would imagine in some level, there's, if I watch you, for example, like all of a sudden kind of hearing, I get this sense of like, oh yeah, maybe the right, because I know that for me, marriage and this whole thing, I've never had secure attachment before.
Yeah, you were saying that. I remember.
I didn't even like it until I had it. I started to experience it. I was like, whoa, what the hell is this? Right? This is what used to look like prison to me feels like the deepest freedom in the world, right? Like,
yeah.
On one level, it's so simple, but I kind of got this sense of oh yeah, like the right thing goes in the center of the mandala, and then the whole mandala, right? And so I
that's it,
yeah. I just kind of got that sense of just like, here you are, like on some level, when, in at least my experience of you, is your things are gathering around you, like your channels, right? Right. There's a stability in your presence, at least online, and what I'm hearing you talk about, like there's a place where there's some kind of stability, that some gathering or is coming together.
Yeah, well, I seem to have the knack for meeting interesting people, that's for sure. I think it's important to be a student and to have, on some level, right? It's important to, I think that's one of the things that's missing in this culture is that people who, people don't look for older people, as models for them. And I've always done that. So I've always met very powerful, older men usually.
Yeah.
And learn that way. Right. Perhaps because in my own family situation, it was very, let's say I spent most of my teenage time tied with my mother, right? And I kind of experienced the feminine world very, very intensely as a younger person, and I didn't relate to masculinity, and at the same time, I guess there was a search for like cosmic father figure on some level, and
oh yeah, totally. So there's a way where I would imagine, for one, is I relate to that, right? I relate to that sense of, I personally had people that have been just really, really deep and smart and wise in multiple dimensions
Me too.
throughout my life, kind of take me under their wing. And in some way, one of the things that they did is they taught me how to learn, I think. Right? Yeah. Like they tell me stories, they'd relate to me in some way that would have some wisdom, right? And they on one level, I was learning everything that they were teaching me, but on another level, I think I was, they were simultaneously teaching me how to be taught, how to learn. Mm-hmm. And I think that's got really deep in me.
That made me think of, you mentioned Heidegger, and I remember there's a quote of Heidegger saying the best teacher is the top learner. Like he's learning all the time and people are just being lifted up with him.
Yeah.
So it's not that he's teaching people, he's learning and then he's lifting up everybody.
Right. Totally. Yes, exactly. Letting learn, I think he says.
So being around somebody like John Vervaeke or Alexander Bard or another guy who I know, his name, nobody knows him, named Chakdom Kepa, who I study Tantric Buddhism with, is there's this incredible demand. At the same time, there's the kind of sweetness that goes along with it.
Yeah, there's a sweetness. Yeah. I think that's that sweetness. So I was just thinking about, like, you're like, yeah, I'd somehow attract these really, like, intensely, almost intimidatingly wise people, right? So I would imagine there's just kind of like, there's a way that you probably listen, right, and attend to those relationships that draws out, I would imagine, like Bard, for example, probably just draws out all the stuff that he loves to talk about, right?
Yeah.
Like, because there's something about, it's not just him, right? There's speaking presupposes a listening, right? There's no speech without listening. In fact, if there is, it becomes really, really worse speech.
Sure.
So there's a kind of I just imagine like the respiration or of the lung, right? There's a kind of like an opening, right, that draws in, and I think about the people in my life, because it's really something to be able to listen to somebody's story, right? Mm-hmm. Like, to listen to a story. In fact, you can listen to a story over and over and over and over again. Like, I think I just exhausted my grandfather of like all the stories, and I've listened to him. My dad, like, and I would just want to listen to him over and over and over again. There's something about that kind of dwelling with somebody in the story and inhabiting it, that
we want to be part of a narrative. We want to be part of a grand narrative. That's what we're longing for, is to be part of this grand narrative, right?
Yeah.
And what do we love more than anything else? That's stories. I mean, that's what we love the most. Mm. Yeah. I mean, that's what's most compelling to human beings is narrative, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And trying to situate ourselves within that narrative. And
that's situating. And then what, just bringing it back to the very thing that you brought up in the beginning of being a walker of between worlds.
Yeah.
On some level, that's kind of, I would say, that's what we're doing constantly, right?
Yeah.
We are the wanderers, right? Or the hermeneutic, like, at the edges of at the borders of things, is we're continually situating ourselves, right? But the situating is a verb, right? It's like, I think that we have to, I would imagine, like Vervaeke, what he talks about is like, on some level, he's really, really, it seems to me that a lot of his work is he's really trying to put the propositional in the right, not get rid of the propositional, right? Not get rid of the definite certainty, but reveal the knowing upon which those certainties arose out of, so we can stand on them to dive deeper in the mystery and stay. Because he seems to be, to me, what it seems like is he's like, look, we got to look at what's emerging. We have to look at the process and the intelligibility of the process, right? And not be blinded to it by our need for certainty and all the stuff that goes underneath that. So there's I would say that there is a commonality of all the people that we've been talking to that have this quality of being a walker of two worlds, and our home in some way is continually deepening that which situates, right? Which seems to be less of a period and more of a question mark, right? What we want to do is we want to restore the question and make that home.
Yeah, as you were talking, I had about 15 different things come through my head. Like, it would be hard not to know which question to ask you, because there was so much there. So I was thinking about your circling, and I was also thinking about dialogos.
Yeah.
And I was wondering what John has contributed to your circling. How you're working with John. What's emerging in your relationship?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, good question.
Because he said something like circling 2.0, and I wonder what that is. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious. Like, So I have a sense of your sense of something.
Yeah.
Like
I mean, I don't know a lot about what circling is. I'm just coming at it from a point of view of intuition, what it feels like, rather than.
Yeah, totally. What's your intuition about it?
Well, my initial intuition is like,
or your sense of it?
Endless psychologizing, California style, people talking and getting nowhere, and then I listened to you talk, and I realized that there was a lot more than that. And I think the fact that you mentioned Heidegger probably clued me into that. There was more going on with that.
Well, what you talked about, like what you're like the things that the psychology and all that stuff, I have to say that stuff is the stuff that drives me crazy about when people call that circling.
Yeah. So I'm sure it's not. So but you would think it would be that, right?
Right.
Well, if you didn't know anything about it, what?
It is that a lot. Yeah. I think there's a lot of people that have done circling that are a number of generations out from the people who taught them it. And the thing that worries me, right, bugs me, and I'm inspired to shift, right, is that strange sense. And I don't think anybody's like, there's no bad actors or like, I think just people, it says something about the world that we're in. Mm-hmm. But when people kind of come in already with a set of psychological assumptions and use these terms that are these kind of psychological terms that have become more about signaling a social in-group of some kind, like lots of words like trauma, right? Or like talking about emotions and shame in these, or like vulnerability or
gotcha.
In these kind of psychological sets that presuppose that all those things have a particular meaning.
Yeah.
That don't go on being questioned. And so,
but the thinking is not happening, right? It's like what Heidegger would say, thinking. The thinking is not happening. It's just it's a kind of salon activity.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's like that's so you're like the around it is I think it's intelligent. I think it's really, really intelligent. Because there's something else available, which I think is where circling the circling for me, and historically, like how it started and my grappling with it in the trenches with the people, like as we were discovering it, it wasn't really the essence of it. It had nothing to do with even personal growth, the notion of personal growth. It was about evoking a wonder, right? In the phenomenological that there's that there is at all, right? Like kind of this sense of, I think that's what we were all at the beach around the fire. As we were circling, what were we doing when we were doing all of that? Like the spirit of it is like, I kept feeling like that fire kept circling around that fire together, and like going through this and talking about our lives would lead to the presence of life in the moment, and then trying to describe it, and then realizing it would go away in the description, but something would come forward and it's going away, and then bringing language to it, and that sense of kind of like philosophical intimacy, right? That sense of ecstaticness that constantly eludes you, but yet constitutes you at the same time.
Yeah.
So that to me, that's the heart of circling, right?
I think I can feel why you were so influenced by Heidegger, right? In doing that, when you're talking about this sort of getting underneath concepts, right? Getting underneath everything and keeping it all dynamic and alive without getting fixed in some kind of,
right.
You know, keeping the as I think everything in Heidegger sort of moves towards poetry on some level, but poetry between people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Totally. Yeah. So on one level, I think, because then I really heard you when you said like keep everything alive. It's more like keep noticing how I don't recognize the aliveness.
Right.
It's like revealing that everything's alive, right? It's like that there is something alive, and that there's something about our time that seems to take that aliveness and make it and extract it,
right?
Categorize it, and make it
kill it, make it dead. You know, we're walking around with corpses everywhere. I mean, we're you know, so it's the zombie image, right? Yeah.
So there's
we have this inside of ourselves where we slip into kind of a dull state.
Yeah.
Where we're not as alive as we could be.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of reasons for that. One reason is just that we're all so hyper socially conscious and you know of our role and our, you know, our job, and you know, how can we be ourselves? How can we flourish as our, you know, ourselves? But how can we just within the actual work? Like I don't want to make it sound like just being yourself, being authentic is the point. It's more than that. It's a discipline and a work as well. It's those two things.
I was thinking about this notion of authenticity, right? If you think about it psychologically, it usually means something like, all right, the thing inside, it matches the thing outside. When the inside matches outside, I'm being authentic.
Yeah.
Which is it usually can turn into like, you know, I just keep revealing myself, right? However, I think that's ontologically, right? Authenticity is something I think more primordial than that, I would imagine, right? More like it's right. There's a discipline to it. And when I think about, you know, authenticity, like author, right? It's more like if you're
in touch with the muse on some level. It's not you.
Yeah.
It's not your personality.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I was thinking about,
it's not even your multiple, not even your, you know, Gurdjieff says or something, man is legion. We have all these millions of sub-personalities. It's not even those voices. It's something coming from beyond.
Right.
That multiplicity, I think, and being having a coherent tonality to it, or
you know? A tonality, a cohere. This is the thing about I think authenticity. If we say authenticity is something like unconcealment, and inauthenticity is something like concealment, right? There's something about those two things, right?
Yeah.
So like authenticity, I think primordially has to do with a way of tending and listening to what is most primordial, right? And I think in our times, it's like listening to that which is most near, right? That which is the horizon that I'm seeing with that I don't see, right? And so on some level, I think on some level, enacting authenticity is more like not just like if I
masturbate in public,
or like, right?
No, it's famous Greek philosopher. I forget who he was.
Yeah, totally. That's craziness, you know. But I think it's more like taking up a role in the culture, right? And and not just doing what I want, but really taking it on is like similar to reading a text, right? It's like reading the text so deeply, right? So like reading all of it, right? So it's kind of trying to read it like where you're waking up the dead author because he feels so right, to the point where you read it so fully that at some point you turn the next chapter and you find yourself writing it, right? Mm-hmm. That sense of authorship is.
Well, you have to be that's what I said about being a student, right? That's probably the beginning part when you're reading the book, and you keep reading the book, and you keep reading the book, and you keep and all the different, nuances and shades and colors of the book, kind of, and until you're actually, you're writing the book. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're the one writing the book.
Absolutely,
it's the book of your life or whatever.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And so I think like it's, for example, in the practice of circling, and it's the one thing I just want to say, it's like there's definitely circling, and then there's guys saying stock, and they're definitely not the same thing, right? In fact, I think if anything, I'm always the one at the edges of everything, kind of listening to the listening to circling and listening to what's beyond it and what's under it, right? So I'm probably more disruptive to circling than I think that's always just been my proclivity. But I think one of the things that when you learn how to circle, right, it's very much that listening. That's really the thing you're practicing. It's the booby prize is connection, right? The booby prize is intimacy, right? Yeah. But it's like what it takes to be intimate are all of these deep things, right? And because if you just think about it, if you want to get closer to the cosmos, right? If you want to really know about reality, you might as well look in the most complex part of the universe, right? Which it seems to be the human face. And you probably want to look at the part of the universe that can actually talk. Tell you about
I was thinking about when you were talking about intimacy, I was thinking about my wife and our intimacy. It's something that you can't really define in any kind of way. And it's very different than what you would imagine it would be, right? It's very different. Like if you're a young person and you're looking for a partner or something, and you have all these needs, and you want this kind of person, and then you meet this kind of person, and then you meet another that doesn't work out, and you meet another person, and you kind of, and then you discover intimacy. That's it's completely different, right? It's not. It's not the same thing as whatever it is you were desiring, or whatever it is you wanted that you thought would fulfill you in some kind of a way. It's something far deeper and
it's almost
unwantable.
It's almost unwantable.
It's unwantable.
Yeah. It's like, because to get it, to experience intimacy is to be transformed by it. So it's like, if I say I want intimacy,
it's almost gross or something, isn't it? It's almost like it's almost like you're imposing on something that is right, that is already there, or already the case.
Like I would word, like it seems like it's just there's something primordially revealing about our being, my existing, that becomes in and through the intimacy. It's and I think people genuinely want intimacy, right? But there is phenomenological quality of that when you actually get it. There's this experience of like, oh my God, there's no way I could, like, whatever I was thinking about, it was right. It is way more than I could have ever even have wanted or known to want. And through having it, I am now somebody that I'm now somebody different, right? That can actually have it. And that's the thing about intimacy. It's like, it is very, very, it's like, it constitutes ourselves, right? Like those moments. If you think about, I really appreciated the way that you talked about that, like that. Yeah. If I think about like what I was doing, talking to my friends over here, maybe dating over here, and then I have this intimacy with my wife, and it's a completely different universe.
Yeah.
What I heard you say.
Oh, well, I was thinking about the product. We tend to be interested in the product, and it's not the process that we're looking for in intimacy, but it's just the living texture of.
Well, how would you describe actually what when you look at that contrast, right? Yeah. As you said, how would you describe the experience of yourself with your partner that is surprising? What is the phenomenology of it? Like, what does it look like, feel like? How has it transformed you, if it has? What is the tonas that as you recognize it?
Well, it's love, but love is such a abused word, right? So I don't want to say that, even though that's what it is. And it's also, again, all of these words are just words, right? So the other word that came to me is divinity or divine, or I was listening to John Vervaeke, and he was saying, that he wanted to talk about the sacred. And I would say, no, it's not sacred. It's divine. In other words, it's just completely divine. It's not sacred. Sacred is something that's a little bit outside, right? It's something that you bow down to, or it has an aspirational quality.
Yeah.
But intimacy in its ultimate sense is fully divine, isn't it? I mean,
yeah. Well, what I'm imagining when I hear the word divine, I get the sense of something behind what's there and shining through. And it has this quality of like encountering you, right? It's it's like divine, meaning it's like it situates. It's clearly greater than I am, right?
Yeah. So the between is larger and deeper than the two separate beings who are, and whatever they're up to.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine it's kind of like what strikes me is we're talking about. Here's the dialogos, right? Like it's just like all of a sudden I'm starting to, something's coming to me that I wasn't aware. I wasn't thinking about it like that. So you can kind of feel, I can kind of feel there's this relationship, like, and then kind of it going up, leading to this like sense of going, something's transcending. Because now I've never quite thought of the divine or the difference between the two in this way. But I think that you're right. It's like there is this sense of what I'm experiencing in this intimacy with my wife does have this constant experience of recognizing that I couldn't have wanted this. Like I definitely couldn't have earned it. I couldn't have even tried to earn it, because whatever it is so present and breaks through. That's so beyond what I did or it didn't do, or all that kind of stuff. Like it feels like it isn't coming from me. It isn't coming from her. There is the divine is the relationship itself somehow.
And it's revealing itself to you. Yeah.
Yeah. And it has me continually.
It's undressing reality, if we could talk about, using erotic terms.
Yeah. It's deeply humbling.
Yeah, also, yeah.
That's part of the, like, I get,
and it has a demand to it. I think the divine has a demand to it on some level.
Right.
But it,
yeah. I like what, like, as you're, when you look out, when you look out and you're like that.
Where am I looking? There's no point in the room that I'm looking at.
I'm thinking of Goethe, or who's the grave?
Gurdjieff.
Yeah. Yeah. Gurdjieff is like looking out there. But since we've been talking about intimacy, and I can feel the presence of your relationship and your wife. Like that, when you look out, it's like the gaze is like more, like it's less peering, and it's more like that.
Yeah. I mean, you're looking out, but you're looking in at the same time, aren't you?
Yeah.
Like the Zen arrow, that points outwards and inwards at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Nice to meet you, my friend.
You too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's like, is it fair to say that, like, there's something about that things erupt in the space between us, right? Things like that seem so, and something grabbing, that they're something about the conversation seems to evoke those things, and you're finding yourself, they become really salient.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the propositional stuff seems backgrounded.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
That's the sense I'm getting, is just like, my only intention was I'd like listen to podcasts and stuff like that. And I would go like, oh my God, there's so much more possible in these conversations with these people. I'm like, Jesus, like there's so much, like so many things that were missed, and it would kind of drive me nuts. And I thought, I was like, somebody said, "Guy, you ought to do a podcast. You'd be a good interviewer." And I was like, okay. So I started thinking about it, and I was like, okay, well, maybe I can justify doing it. Maybe this is a good way to kind of get the word out, so to speak. And I was thinking, like, it'd be kind of interesting just to try to have a conversation where it was like, it was a sweet spot between, like, you could say, like a normal conversation or interview and something like circling. Like, what would be the sweet, right? It's not too weird where people are like, what the hell is that? Right. And it's, so it's really kind of hits that sweet spot. And
well, I was talking to Bonita Roy recently, a very interesting person. And the first thing I said is, I don't want to be formal. I don't want to be marketing. I don't want any spirit of marketing to infect a conversation with somebody. I want to throw this whole, game sort of, overboard, right to the essential thing.
Right. Totally.
Like, you don't need any effects. You don't need. I got a little bit of music at the beginning of the podcast, but I make it very short, and I don't need production. I don't need any of these things. I guess I get eventually, perhaps if this takes off, maybe I will have to think more about those things. But the raw stuff is always more interesting.
Yeah, it's like, if you think about the raw stuff, and you're making a distinction between like, oh yeah, I don't want to do this one thing.
Yeah.
And I do want to do this other thing.
Yeah.
This other thing, I don't quite know what it is, but this marketing, I'm imagining, is something like, I don't want to like frame and then
it's not even that I don't want to, it's that I'm incapable of it,
The question that comes up for me in that is, what are you in allegiance to? Or maybe it was the way, when you looked at it, that which you're in allegiance to is the thing that you can't not be, right? You can't not break. Yeah. What are you in allegiance to? We just kind of, I think this is maybe related to that question about the divine double.
Right. Yeah, I'm in allegiance to the divine double. Yeah, indeed. I would have to be, because it would be too painful not to be. It's not because I have some kind of. It's not because I'm particularly authentic, or, I play music, and it was always improvisation, and I could never play the same song the same way because it would be boring, right?
Yeah.
It's problematic in certain situations in the world, but it's in other ways it's an advantage, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And
you've obviously been able to turn that into something that gives you a unique place.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel very fortunate. I feel very, very, very fortunate about that. Because in so many ways, I'm relating. First of all, I relate to the clumsiness and the always ahead of yourself on some level. Like, you're always oriented to the thing that you can't quite say, right? So you end up kind of losing mid-sentence, and then no one's understanding you, but that thing's still glowing, and there's a in-betweenness that doesn't lend itself to finished, coordinated end products like marketing.
Yeah.
Right? Like, marketing is something like you go through all that stuff so that you can present something to have a particular effect, right? It's more of a transactional, right? I'm saying this so that we get there. So,
well, I worked in marketing a little bit, and I was good at concept generation. Like, I could think I was good at coming up with cool ideas.
Yeah.
But I was definitely the back office guy. I wasn't the guy knocking on doors trying to sell the product.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. So I totally get it. You're the back guy. You're the one that is oriented towards the chaos. Yeah. So I would think, so there's something about for me, I feel an allegiance to that thing that I doesn't quite have a word yet for it, right? I think one of the things I've really liked about the practicing circling for the last 20 years, if I think about the machinery it exercises, is listening to people, for just listening to them. And what listening is so much more than just being quiet and paying attention, right? It's doing that over and over and over again. I feel more oriented to, I think, the revealing of that which I continually find myself an allegiance in, which is something like that moreness, or that sense of the inexhaustible intelligibility that behind things that's divine. So it's just whatever it is, just having your compass set to that, right? It just seems like if you just orient that way of okay, I really want to get you at the deepest level. I want to understand why you exist and how you exist. And those things have you go very, very deep and concrete and right here, right now, but they simultaneously have all of these deep, primordial, transcendental, contextual disclosures of the whole, right? I mean, that's what a human being is in the moment. What the hell else is it but an awkward coming together of infinity and finitude, right? It's that's the human face. That's probably why when somebody walks into a room, we're it changes the whole moment, right? Or let's say afterwards, that you're going to go to a shooting, right? After this podcast, this would be a completely different moment, right?
Go to a shooting? What do you mean? Go to shoot somebody?
He's somebody, you're going to go watch somebody get shot, or you're going to go meet your mother, or you're going to win $1 million.
Yeah.
In some way, what's constituting this moment are these are this recognition of one time, right, temporality, but also this sense of like when we're in the presence of another human being, it's not just like another object. Yeah. It's it changes the texture of the meaning of the moment, right? If you know them, if you don't know them, it's like,
yeah.
So you're looking at pure meaning when you're looking at another human being. And then if you look at, well, what is meaning? So it's like everything. It's one of the things like when I really got this when I was in art school. I moved to San Francisco to go to the San Francisco Art Institute, a sculptor and a painter.
Yeah.
And I had this amazing teacher, this life drawing teacher, right? Where we would like constantly draw, they'd have like nude models and stuff like that. So we were constantly drawing nude models and to hear him talk about, it's really fun when he would do his critiques, because to hear him talk about like what it was to render a human being. Mm-hmm. And he would say that, it's weird. You can get away with like drawing an animal,
in
a way that you can't get away with in drawing a human being. And he says, because every single part of the human being is dynamic and expressive. And I think what I've come to understand that is that there's not 1 inch of the figure that doesn't communicate a world, right? There's not one part of it that doesn't express, right, a whole culture, a whole world, a whole lifetime, a whole future. So if you render it either realistically or abstractly in a way that, like, if any part of it doesn't speak or say, it somehow doesn't really show its humanity. It doesn't show its figurativeness. And
what that made me think of is that when you try to create the whole of a person, if you were sketching them or drawing them, you could only do that if it was incomplete. Like the human being is incomplete, right? Whereas the animal would be complete already, right? Yeah. Whereas if you're drawing a human being, you're drawing something incomplete.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
Yes. It's like you're drawing a being that every part of its being is given by what it isn't, right? An anticipation of its own death and all the horizons that ultimate horizon animates as meaningful and apparent. Like we are that which we're facing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that is what we're looking at when we're looking at a human being. But then if you say that, you're talking about, we're looking at all time. We're looking at like the one horizon you'll never reach, your death, right? And everything that lights up. So if you just start talking about one part of your life, right? If you just take that thread and you follow it all the way down, you're gonna find yourself at the weave of the whole universe. No matter what it is, it's just, and there's something about, for me, when learning that and just having that orientation and listening in that way, that has just really weaved me into a person that just feels better about being alive.
Yeah.
It makes the world so much more interesting.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder. I'm a musician. Music is more my world than the visual world. So, I wonder the differences. I wonder the differences between a visual sense of, like you're talking about drawing a person. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I could ever relate to that particularly. I don't know if I see with my eyes so much.
What do you think? Like what are you hearing about, like, what I'm saying? Like, if you were to re-say what I just said or what you heard, how would you put it?
Oh, I was just you're bringing me into your appreciation for the depth of a human being or something like that.
Yeah, totally. I'm just curious, like, so when in just answering that question, what was that like? What was in answering that last question is like, when you go like, what, how would you say it? Like, what are you hearing when you answered that question? Where did that bring you?
When I was answering that question, well, I guess I didn't want to get the wrong answer. I didn't want to say something superficial or trite. I wanted it to be the right answer.
Yeah, totally. So there was a sense of like, oh yeah, there is something there that could be more on.
Yeah.
Right. So you had a sense of like that there was something that you heard, and that it wasn't everything. It was something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a feeling. See, I think one of the things in terms of one of the things I've been finding myself when I was going to say, it's like when I started doing these conversations online, that was my only goal, was just kind of like, well, let's see if we could just do a normal conversation and something like circling and just find the sweet spot, right? Yeah. I wanted to see if I could do that. And what I found out is that, like, I didn't try to do anything. I just ended up engaging in the conversation. And through that, I actually discovered that that's what I do all the time.
Yeah.
Like in most of my conversations. Yeah. And that's, I could feel like the all the circling I've done through the years and how much it's contributed to me. And I've given it to it in this anagogic relationship I've had with all the people involved. It's funny, I could see all that come out in this new context, but with people that have these intense models, right? Like John Vervaeke and, who else? Not Jordan Peterson, Jordan Hall.
Jordan Hall, sure. Yeah.
You saw these, like all these, like Christopher, all these people who have this very studied background, right? And then engaging in these conversations and me thinking that they have these kinds of conversations all the time, and them going like, whoa, this was different.
No, maybe they don't have those kind of conversations all the time. Like, because they're academics and you're bringing a sort of, it's like I guess the image I have is something like an African drummer trying to speak to a classical composer or something like that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's like there, and it's been mutually affording, right? Yeah. It's been mutually and very anagogic of where this back and forth, like what I'm experiencing.
Right. Because maybe you have been working in this sort of world where you're trying to. I'm looking for a phrase which Bonita was talking about. She was talking about education, and she was talking about how we don't train the, let's say, affective self, or the sensual self, or the self that is the sensual self, I guess is the best way we could say it. We don't really train that in education, right? And so then she says that people get to their 50s or something like that, and they realize that they haven't trained that part of them. And that's probably, you've been training that part of yourself. Your affective, emotional, artistic life, and those guys have been training their intellectual training and refining their intellectual life. Yeah, more probably, and a bit less the affective life. So they're probably attracted to you for your ability to bring them there, and you're attracted to them for their ability to refine your sort of wildness into something more coherent that could be expressed.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been interesting to watch. So you're going to ask me, like, what have I gotten out of these conversations with Vervaeke? And I would say with Vervaeke and with Chris and with all these people, right, that I've been talking with, I've been getting tons out of it, man. Yeah. I've been like, it's just deeply encouraging.
Sure.
Like I feel just deeply encouraged.
Me too. Yeah.
I just feel deeply encouraged in the thing that just called you forward, like that thing that spoke, right? Like that's animated, whatever that is. Yeah. I feel that too.
Well, I had a chat with Christoph Mastropietro, and it started with a letter conversation. And he had this way of writing, and I was like, "Wow, yeah, wow!" I thought I was talking to Herman Melville or Henry James or Edgar Allan Poe or something. It was like, wow, nobody writes like that anymore. Nobody writes with that kind of elaboration or that kind of poetic elaboration. It's almost like I was talking to a person from the 19th century, and then we had a conversation. And I felt like, okay, I feel at home here in a way I don't with most people. I here's a human being. I feel like I'm enriched in his presence and in this discussion, and that's where I want to be all the time. I want to be in that kind of enriched. I want to have that enriched feeling when I'm speaking to people, all the time. Otherwise, I mean, I don't want to put down just the banalities of life, but
yeah, there's something. So it's like you made a contrast.
Yeah,
I like what's being bored in this conversation here. Like I like what you're impregnating the conversation with, right? So like now Chris is here,
yeah,
right, in a certain sense, or your experience of Chris in what. So Chris, I mean, like. Chris is something else. Like Chris is just, he is, whenever I've watched anybody talk about Chris, they always pause and they're like, yeah, they go, he is poetry, mm-hmm. right?
Yeah, he's a poet on some level, like, and so that's deeply. It's rare to meet a poet, I would say. And I would say, especially now, because people don't care about poetry. And most poetry is just swallowed up by the machine, right? Mm. By the endless discussions and
yeah. And there's a way where he just dwells there, like the way that language loves him, right, and inhabits him is just so. Because when he talks, he just gathers like you can like literally watch him speak, and he has a wrestling match that somehow comes out like you get the woven tapestry of a wrestling match of just something like where he's like, yeah, it's buckets, like the idea of intelligibility, and he weaves these two things of like the deft hand and right that which beholds is that which was beholden, and there's this world coming on, and there's a way in which I really get with him. And
he's so young at the same time, which is so odd. It's so odd to talk to somebody who's 30 years old who has that kind of ability to speak, I guess, just speak words,
And that feelings, do you notice that feeling? For me, it's like it's almost like in a way that as we're talking with him, talking about Chris, there's a way in which I feel we've just evoked a spirit of some kind. Yeah, I feel like in a context, in a womb of some kind or a different space, and just evoking his name. Mm. And I would say that that I think what I feel evoked by, right, and invoked into, right, is I would imagine would be something like whatever it is that calls Chris into being. Like I'm wondering about, that's another thing about because I'm still trying to get this notion of the divine double, right?
Yeah.
Like one of your questions was, what is your divine double? And I was like, man, it just seems like whatever, if I could answer that question, it probably isn't it. There's the thing that's beyond the horizon, right?
I thought of the quote by Rilke, he says, every angel is terrifying.
Yeah.
And that's our divine double in some sense. which can't be defined, and it also destroys us in some sense. It
extremely disdains to annihilate us.
It disdains to annihilate us. Exactly.
Yeah, Rilke is. But so there's something about, I think this is part of the thing about Chris, is what he evokes in me, and it sounds like something very similar for you. Is he evokes whatever it is that calls him to language. It's like but it goes beyond Chris, right? There's this quality of that there is something really transcendent in just evoking his name. He's transparent to something that his language calls in and comes from. I just end up really just like, I really like him. I just really like that guy a lot. He's such a well,
I guess that's the thing that's likable is allowing yourself to be open to that transparency.
Yeah.
Which makes you feel like you're talking to somebody who's not a persona, who's not a mask, who's not mechanical in his way of being. Somebody who's like I guess opened up to that. Yeah. On some level.
Yeah. I mean, almost, and I think to share in the way that he does, I think one of the things maybe that gets communicated for me in that sharing is there something, there is a quality when he speaks so lyrically and poetically and espouses in this way, and how it just like rolls off of him. That there is a way in which because he talks about symbolism a lot, about in the way that Tillich does, where a symbol is transparent. You look through a symbol, right? It's like the symbol like speaks to what's beyond itself, in some ways embodies it, but beyond it. So you actually live a symbol, you enact a symbol, right?
And a symbol is complex. It's not opaque.
So if you imagine like Chris is speaking symbology, right? But he's pointing to whatever symbol it is that would speak symbology at the same time. And there's this reverent thing that is fills you up. And I've noticed that with Chris and with people like Chris, that there's something evocative.
Yeah, he's evocative. That's interesting. Yeah, a word. And I'm contrasting him to other people who have another kind of quality, which might be more fierce or more like extreme clarity. Jordan Hall has this extreme clarity about him. It's almost fierce.
What are we doing? What is this thing, this corner of the internet, like these conversations that are gathering around, in which you seem to be one of the places that a lot of it's gathering together, right? And so there's a way in which kind of talking about these people in a way is in some level is talking about on the space I live inside of, right?
Yeah.
And being you could say the finding our homes in that which is homeless inherently, constantly situating ourselves, right? But kind of attracted, our home is in the question mark, right? So that there's always a way in which I feel a kinship with you in the constantly finding home, right? Constantly finding it. So talking about, I was just noticing that talking about Chris, one is I'm in at Vervaeke, and there's a way these people have just deeply impacted me, right? And contributed to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too.
Feel that. Like, I can kind of feel moved, as I'm feel my heart open as I'm just talking about it. I'm like, yeah, like, and it's so good. Like, it's such a good way. Like, like just, I feel the sense of like, when I talk with them, like what they want is good. What they're looking at is good. What we're peering together out at is good. And I just don't like, it's just so clearly, it's been,
I think it's good faith that emanates from those people, completely, right? Good faith.
Right.
There's never a feeling of somebody, gaming with you or playing some kind of a,
right. Right.
sleazy game of some kind. It's just good faith, right? So when all the marketing is gone, then maybe that's what we really want is to communicate with each other in good faith.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. And I think I find myself, as we're talking, it's a great word, good faith. Well, I find myself having faith in it. And then as we talk about it, it's not like I'm present necessarily to having faith. I live in it. And so as we talk about it and I see it, I'm like, oh yeah, I bet on some level what I'm talking about is there's something about the authenticity of these dialogues and what we're all up to and how much good faith that there is that I realize, like. So
I guess sincerity is very powerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sincerity is almost something that cuts through all that bullshit, which, but it's even more than that. It's I guess I'm coming back to, it's just revealing what's true, more and more revelation, more and more consciousness, I guess, or more and more like even if it's just a little bit, it's making the world alive again, I guess.
Yes.
Again, as we're walking through this field of corpses,
Yes, totally. And it's doing it in such a way that it's actually kind of here evoking Heidegger, right? And the Greeks and the pre-Socratics, right? Which is this kind of notion, the original notion of truth, right? Which
Aletheia, yeah.
I've heard it said it.
I probably pronounce it wrong because I just have it in my head. I've heard people say it.
Aletheia or Aletheia, right?
Aletheia.
And just to give some context for that, my understanding is that Aletheia was a river, or sometimes it's also portrayed as a lake in Greek mythology, right? And it's a river or lake of forgetfulness, which is really interesting when you think about this, because I realized I didn't really quite grok Aletheia for years, and I thought I did, which is very Alethian in this way. But so it's like, it'd be something like if you're walking along, if Guy's walking along and he trips and he falls in Lake Aletheia. It's not like people are like wake up in the morning and they don't find Guy and they're like, where's Guy? No, he's completely forgotten. It's missing that Guy's missing, right? Like it's missing that he's missing. So it's completely concealed. So if you think about Aletheia,
the truth is concealed, you mean?
Yeah. And the truth is when it goes Aletheia. So it's the is the event, right?
That's the first syllable too, isn't it? Yeah.
Right. Of that which is veiled or concealed is the moment that its concealedness becomes unconcealed. So that's, so right there was a little bit,
Yeah.
When people, that's right. That you could say that is a local manifestation of something's revealed. And it's interesting because it isn't cognitive necessarily.
No.
It's bottom up, right? It's bottom up. That experience of revelation, right?
Yeah.
And I think
that's what's drawing us back for this little taste of Aletheia each time.
Yeah. So there's this quality for me, and I thought for years, I always thought that what the truth was what was revealed, right? The Aletheia, like
it's not a what though, is it?
It's like what? Yeah,
it's not a what.
Yes, the what is something like the proposition, right? It's something like the.
It's not like, I just found the Holy Grail. Here's the Holy Grail.
Right.
More like you found something that is unfolding into something else, and it's process and sort of endless process.
Yes. And I think what unfolds, because of what I think that what Heidegger was re-evoking, was remembering, and going back and into the notion of truth in Aletheia. I think what he was pointing out was something that got lost, which is what Heidegger, I think, kind of does. And that's what's so cool about reading him, is that you walk back into these places. And it's a complete, to do that, even if you don't understand what the hell he's talking about, just the attempt to, as you do these acrobats that are just, I find them to be deeply evoking and transformative almost.
Yeah.
And so Aletheia, I started to realize that I don't think it's about what's revealed. I think what's actually the real thing that got unconcealed is concealment itself, is the revelation of that being, right? For being to be disclosed, is it reveals that it was disclosed, that its nature is concealment, that when it reveals itself, what it reveals is that there is concealment, and that being is that thing which you can never become completely clear about. It's the inexhaustible horizon of
itself is the last,
right?
Maybe being is the last concealment.
Yeah. Yes. And like in revealing it, right? Yeah. It reveals, and in a certain sense conceals its revealing, right? Kind of like light lights up everything, but yet it withdraws in its disclosure, right? So it's like, and when it withdraws, it does something that animates everything that we are. And the thing about it, so like a good example of this would be, see, it's funny. It's like these are the things that I even this is kind of very Alethian as I'm talking about it, because I've been grappling with Aletheia my whole life, but I don't have this experience of like.
But that's because it's a genuine idea, isn't it? Yeah. It's a genuine idea because there's no end to what it can reveal about itself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So to get close to it is like, it is intimate. Like I'm like I've probably said this over and over again, but what has me say it is that I feel like the closer I get to it, the more it withdraws and reveals at the same time. It's very much pregnant with what it is. But it's interesting. I think the movie that exemplifies this is the movie The Sixth Sense. Remember that movie with Bruce Willis?
Yeah, he was dead for yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was dead the whole time, right?
Yeah.
And so you're watching the movie and he's dead and he doesn't know it, right?
Yeah.
And none of the audience knows it either. So we're all like, it's all kind of weird. Something's kind of strange or something. And then right at the end of the movie, I don't remember exactly what happens, but somehow, like out of the corner of his eye, he kind of starts to get. And then as he gets, the whole audience gets, there's this moment of Aletheia. It starts to become revealed. He's dead. And as it's revealed, you can kind of feel it go through the movie theater, right? This revelation. He's like, oh my God, I'm dead. And then like a moment later, once that recognition, the revealing comes in, then it goes back to the very beginning of the movie, and it flashes these like the main frames of everything that you just had watched.
Uh-huh.
And you see that it was obvious the whole time.
Yeah.
Right. There's something about that, like that revelation of concealment in its obviousness, in its nearness. Right. So I think one of the good faithness, like what we're doing and what draws on this good faith in these conversations, right, is that that we're all oriented towards truth, but in this Alethian sense, that there's a kind of implicit understanding or quality that we embody, right, in our search, which is this sense of like that there's something that we're it's not like we're trying to dominate or get clear about something. It's more like we're looking and loving truth. And to look for truth is to look towards concealment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to be oriented towards that which is yet unveiled.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why a lot of the conversation is about the times that we live in. And as Heidegger would say, is that the time that we're living, the techno-framing age of technology that we're in, is it's not technological devices, and it's not technology itself. It's the way of understanding everything at all, everything that's anything at all, by virtue of which we understand it as a kind of standing in reserve, fully available, right? To be optimized, to be extracted, to be ordered, to function.
And that's the death that you're talking about, in a way.
Yeah. Yes. And what it conceals, and what he would say is the danger, and he also said this is the saving power. Within the danger is the saving power. He evokes Holdren there, right? Is the danger is that this is what demarcates this understanding of everything that is, the understanding of being of our time, is that it is what it conceals is that there's anything concealed, right? It optimizes so everything's available. Everything is, including ourselves. We are now part of the standing reserve, in which, if you just look at our attitudes about ourselves, is like we look at our bodies like it's something. This like, look, let's hack the shit out of this thing, right? Yeah. Let's extract all of these things and make and release all the potential out of ourselves, so that we can harness it and order it. And that is so deep in. It's both outside and it's inside. And I think what Vervaeke is talking about with the meaning crisis, what Jordan Hall, his determination, his sense of like deep urgency, right? Calm, like fierce urgency, and like systems thinking. It's all on some level. It's through hearkening this sense of the concealment of all that is, right? This forgetfulness of being, right? And that I think this is what really Heidegger brings to fore, that I really resonate with, which is like we're in a time where being is present in its complete withdrawal, and that. So if you want to reveal like being, notice, like look at where it's withdrawing, because that's where it is.
Jacques Stein was saying in Alchemy or something, is that you have to look at the putrefaction, or you have to look at the image of, the most. You have to look where it's impossible to look, where you cannot look, because it's too much of, it's too shocking, it's too terrible, it's too, and it's too, you could almost use the word evil for it or something, this dehumanizing force.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the question. I think that we're on some level, whether or not we can conceptualize it or not. Like there's I think one of the things that is gathering this we, that we can somehow call a we, this corner of the universe, is it's like real orientation to listening, right? To that which is no longer calling. Like we can hear that objects and people in our lives and the structures of institution, that they're no longer things, don't have any sense to them. They they don't animate in sense, right? And I think that a lot of the symptomology is why we're like, people are getting so moralistic, because on some level they're trying to bring sense into this deprecation of things not making any sense. So you get this morality. So
you get shallow morality instead of genuine ethics or genuine action or the schools make you stupid, the money makes you poor, and medicine makes you sick. That was a quote that Zach was saying. Yeah.
so it's weird. So it's like wild. So people are, so for example, I mean, you can see that the people's moralistic responses to things that cannot be penetrated by any kind of rationality or reason, right? It's like, they just.
So is that where religio comes in, to use John's phrase, or religion? Because all you have is shallow morality if you don't have a deep religio, I think.
Yeah. It's one of the things I think that implicitly is evoked in relationship, right? Which is basically religio. I think I don't know if I understand it completely, but I think what that highlights is the enactment of the religion. It's the are you familiar with David Bentley Hart? Have you heard?
Sure. Yeah.
I really like, a lot of people are really irritated by him, but I think he's just really funny, and he is so smart. Yeah. Like, the guy is just. He's really, really smart, and he's very pompous.
I keep meaning to read his book, actually, because he says a lot of, again, he has this sort of offensive, he comes on in this offensive way, but then he always says something that sticks with you.
Yeah. And he's a modern theologian that actually grapples with continental philosophy, which is not that present in theologians. So there's something very living about his thinking. He's encountered Heidegger and wrestled with it, and he's still grappling with it. It's alive. And one of the things he said, so a lot of how he's become popular amongst non-academics is through writing books in response to to atheism, to the the new atheists. Right. And I think, and I really kind of got this, and I think this exemplifies religio. When he was speaking to a claim by, I think, Dawkins, is like, well, like, how can you say that there's a God? How can you prove it? How can you prove it? Like, that whole thing.
Yeah, sure. How can you prove it?
He's like, well, okay, so if we were to run, if we were to run an experiment, what we would need to do, Mr. Dawkins, is you need to, in the way that he's talking about God, right? The way that, I think David Hart, and the Christian, at the deepest sense of the word, the theistic sensibility about God is like, well, what you would need to do is you would need to probably spend 2-3 years going to church, praying, going in contemplative prayer, doing lectio divina, going through the rituals, rites, the ceremonies, the confessions. He's like, and then 2-3 years later, right? Then we can take a look.
Then we can have a conversation about religion, right?
Yeah, it's then we can start to talk about the proof of the presence of God. And I think this is what I think Vervaeke, my understanding of Vervaeke, is when he's talking about participatory knowing, that there's participatory knowing is part of what it's knowing through being presence. And so the enactment of participating in the religion, right, is so intimately woven with God, right? So you can just get the sense of, if Dawkins went and did that for 3 years, it's very feasible that he would come out at the end of that. He'd be like, whoa, the presence of God, right, is you can't uncollapse it from the knowing of participation.
Yeah.
And so I think Vervaeke is kind of basically coming along with religio is well, perhaps what we just need to do is not pretend like we can have a proposition that's unscientific. That's already happened. We're so imbued with science and technology that we understand ourselves in it, right? You can't just decide not to be. So I think what Vervaeke is doing is he's not trying to piss in the wind of history. He's basically kind of really taking our fate and seeing, and this is what I think is the right way to respond to this age of technology, is not being against it, but developing it beyond itself. So I think I sense that sensibility in Vervaeke in what he's doing. He's not trying to start a religion. He's trying to disclose the intelligibility of all those practices.
Well, actually, that was Bard's kind of criticism of him. It's like, oh, you're actually, what you're talking about is religion.
Yeah.
That is religion. So
Right.
the rest of it is what we're criticizing, what Dawkins is criticizing, is dead religion. So we don't have to believe in the God that Dawkins doesn't believe in,
right?
Either. But there's something we're talking about, the fundamental sort of communal aspect of humanity, and that begins in the first stone that you build of the first temple, right?
Yeah, totally.
So
yeah, I've heard
that's what we are, sort of. So
right.
So but I wouldn't want to go. We don't want to go back to an Iron Age religion, but we want to, as you say, disclose.
And this is where I think that
the essence of it.
Where I think with Bard, in response to Bard, first of all, Bard, I've been listening to Bard. Everything all the videos that come out in his books. Bard is like, he's something, man. I like him a lot.
Yeah.
So I just get the sense he's on fire. Like there's something.
He's to me, he's Nietzsche with the hammer.
Yeah. He's exactly.
He's Nietzsche with the hammer in the way that John is Socrates, or Socrates with the question.
Right.
Bard is Nietzsche with the hammer. It's nice. Actually, we're going to get those two together in Toronto.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
In April. Yeah.
Looking forward to that. And I have a feeling that there is something paradoxical there.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's like when he says, so for example, in Bard's response to it, he's like, no, it's not that. We don't want to get rid of the religion and do this kind of weird kind of emergent sense of, he talks about, right? When he starts breaking things apart, right? And hitting with the hammer. Actually, I think when he says, no, we need to be more religious.
Yeah.
Right. That I sense an echo of that is I think that there's a way in which they're actually, I don't think they're talking about the same thing, but I think they're talking about that which has multiple aspects to it.
Mm-hmm, sure.
Right? But there's something they're wedded to. And I have a feeling that, so the phallus, right? And I don't know if I understand exactly what he means by that, but based on what I do understand, or my misunderstanding, it strikes me as like it's actually very penetrating to, like, there's a penetration quality to it. But the penetration right now is like, if, for example, we can no longer have a proposition, right, that demarcates metaphysics, right? Like that we can't make ourselves believe in that anymore. Like that's our fate. We are in a new age, right? That even deeply religious.
I don't know about that. Maybe we can make ourselves believe in that. Maybe there's all kinds of things that happen that we don't understand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, that thing that we can believe in that we don't understand, right? Uh-huh. I think what it's that, right, which is where the phallus needs to penetrate, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't need to propose and make a claim, right, of like, this is it, right? Then you start to evoke all of the fucking things that, like, historically have just made things go to shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think the penetration is actually being able to stay with the mystery and reveal the ontological mystery to that which cannot be proposed, be housed in a proposition. Mm-hmm. And that actually, besides that is the thing that animates our lives.